welcome students of ESC413. I'm just going to do a quick assignment to walk through for your benefit. So it's due on the 16th of October and the length for this one is 1,500 words with your 10% give or take there. The task is broken down into two distinct parts, but part B relies a lot on part A, and you'll see that in a moment. So you need to select, describe, analyze, and evaluate 3 web-based resources in that order. So part A is your learning sequence, and there's a suggested 300 words for this, but of course you can allocate however much time depending on the way you approach it. So you need to describe 3 or 4 lessons in your chosen subject area. The lessons can be part of a unit of work or a small unit of work on a particular topic. So they might be from learning one whole lesson plan that has different sequences within that lesson plan. So it might have an orientation phase, an enhancement, and a conclusion, and then the orientation or the revision element for the next lesson. So they can be, it is best that they are all related so that they're all on that one subject and they're all on that one topic, okay? Because you have to provide the overall aim for the sequence. The best way of attacking this assignment, if you will, is to begin with your 2 to 3 learning outcomes. So go to your curriculum documents, go to your syllabus. There's an example one here, and of course, we should all know where the BOSTES and ACARA websites are now. So head to your particular curriculum document, pick 2 or 3 learning outcomes, and then think about the teaching and learning activities that you are going to do, or you're going to implement, or at least plan for, to address these learning outcomes, okay? And then from there, you choose your tool. You choose the tool that's going to enhance the objectives of those lesson sequences. All right. From doing that, you'll be able to come up with a nice little overall aim. So the overall aim might be that students will understand key themes of Romeo and Juliet. Then you're going to do these 3 specific learning outcomes. So obviously, they're going to learn what a theme is. They're going to identify 2 key themes in the play, and then they're going to show how a character interacts with those themes, okay? They give examples. Then you're talking about how your students will be assessed. So that's all for part A. So it is nice and brief. It's just an introduction to you, to your key learnings, to your learning sequences, basically, where you very clearly identify those learning outcomes. Okay, so that's your big takeaway, because your rubric is very heavy with that. Part B, your web-based resources. So there's 1,200 words. Obviously, you have your introduction where you're reflecting back on that subject area, the stage of the students, and the sequence of the lessons. Your resource description. You're identifying and describing 3 Web 2.0 tools, okay? So they have to be Web 2.0. There's a lot out there for different platforms, different devices, but your focus for this is that they're accessible online, okay? And 2.0, they have to be interactive. There has to be some merit to their interactivity, because that is, part of the definition of 2.0, okay? So you're including the link, obviously. The important part here is what platforms can it run on? Is there any cost involved? And you can have screenshots as well. But what platforms can it run on and any cost? This is where you're showing your capacity to evaluate. Okay, so this Web 2.0 tool, let's say we'll do example is Socrative. So It's a good tool because it goes across all platforms. If you have internet connection, you can get on it. All you need is a browser and you're there. There's no cost associated for students. There is also no sign up. So, you're covering ethical things there. Explanation of resources. Explain how you're going to use each of the resources to, and this is the big part, enable students to achieve the learning outcomes in your sequence, okay? So one possible approach to this is to have a subheading of your outcomes, and then just do your analysis and evaluation and explanation of that learning outcome under that subheading, and then move on to your next one. That way you're giving each tool the same amount of time and effort and analysis and evaluation. So obviously, Socrative, the learning outcome, might be that this is the tool that I'm using to check for understanding. Checking for understanding lets me as the teacher know where students are at, and to reevaluate, replan, provide further resources, etc. I'm adding in my analysis and evaluation, and most importantly, linking to theory and pedagogical approach, which of course this one here would be mastery knowledge. I'm not going to give everyone a quiz and say, okay, well, you've all failed that, moving on to the next thing now. We're going to give them a quiz to check for their understanding, and then I'm going to apply the theory of mastery learning to go back and pedagogically differentiate and reteach my students everything that they need to know to master this specific learning outcome, okay? Your conclusion is the summary, the appropriateness of using Web 2.0 to achieve the aim of the sequence. So how did it benefit? Going into your rubric now. Okay, so your learning sequence is worth 10 marks. We're only going to talk to what a high distinction is, but you've got a well-considered learning sequence, so it's logical, it makes sense, it flows, so evident links between each lesson, there's a suitable aim and learning outcomes. Cannot fault you if they're from BOSTES, so that is a very easy way to get those marks. Importantly though, you have to look at the range of teaching and learning activities are relevant and motivating. Teaching and learning activities are a fitting match for the desired outcomes, and of course you have that suitable assessment information. Don't forget about that one little bit at the end there where it says how are you going to assess your students to ensure that they have met those learning outcomes, or at least one of those learning outcomes. All right, the high distinction is, while doing that, the sequence actually shows evidence of initiative and originality, ingenuity. So this is where you're getting innovative. So outside of logic, you're using the learning outcomes in a very targeted and rigorous way, but it's interesting because this part is a lot about student engagement. You see a lot of, motivating and engaging in this particular rubric. Your resource description is worth 5 because all you're really doing is describing the resources and you're saying how they're relevant to the intended learning outcomes. An explanation of your resources. This is another 10 marks where you're explaining how they're going to be used. So there's no gaps. Don't make assumptions just because the tool has an obvious, Socrative has an obvious, it allows you to quiz and check for understanding. Still say it. To get the marks, you need to be explicit. Anything implied really can't be marked. If I have to draw the connections between things, it can lead to, I suppose, subjectivity, or when you're reading, you shouldn't have to join the dots yourself. As a reader and as a marker, it should be explicit. So you're making the explicit connections between the tool and the learning outcomes, and enabling and constraining factors for their use. So obviously, I'll keep with my example of Socrative. I can't, constriction in that respect would be that in that tool, I can't actually instantly send students the next level of work. Okay, so they have to go out of the tool to find supplementary resources. Something that is enabling is it's allowing students to have instant feedback, which is one of the main benefits of Web 2.0 technologies. You can also use that in your analysis and evaluation. Okay, so it's well written, analysis of the choice of resources. Your ideas are integrated with an understanding of 2 or more relevant learning theories or pedagogies. So this is been given to you as a quantitative number, so this is at least 2. So to get a credit, you must have mentioned 2. To get a pass, you must have mentioned 1. Obviously, to get a distinction and high distinction, you're mentioning more than 2 learning theories, which means that they must have academic references. I'm going to address that in another short video, just giving you some feedback on your blog, but it's also very targeted at referencing skills because unfortunately that is one area of lack for some students, but it's also an area that isn't necessarily taught in one of those presumptive things at university, that assumptions are made that everyone comes in from an academic background and just knows how to reference, what to reference, when to reference, and why. So I'll address that in a different video, but know that for your 15 marks here, you're talking to me about the links between your learning outcomes, the web tools, and theory and pedagogical approaches supporting with academic references. In something as big as this, so really you want to aim for a reference every 200, 250 words. Presentation and structure and style. Hopefully as you're writing and planning, you feel inspired and come up with an approach that you think makes a lot of sense and has good flow. But importantly in this, we've all edited good sentence and paragraph construction, consistently accurate APA referencing. That isn't just in your structure and technique, that's in you are referencing. When you are providing an idea, you're referencing it. Observing the word limits, but in terms of your structure for this, my advice is obviously A sort of does itself, but you might have a nice title. So you don't have to have an introduction to this. You can just have a general heading, learning sequence for stage 6 English. And then you go on to provide your maybe a subheading, learning outcomes, and then 3 learning outcomes with your summary, etc., etc. Then you might have a subheading, complementary web-based resources for stage 6 English Shakespeare unit. And then you carry on from there. But as I said earlier, explanation of resources, analysis and evaluation, that can be tied together, and you might consider doing that under the subheadings of your 3 Web 2.0 resources, okay? Hopefully this has shed some light for you all. Don't forget to email me if you have any questions, and of course I will be in discussion boards to check and see how you're all going.